So my original plan for this week was to finish off a few reviews that I had currently going in production, and basically other than that, have a quiet week. And then I woke up this morning and there was an email or a little message from Big Finish in the inbox, and it turns out that they've decided to release a whole entire box set, which is of course The Lives of Captain Jack Volume 2, featuring John Barrowman as of course Captain Jack Harkness, alongside Colin Baker as the 6th Doctor, which is a very unusual occurrence because of course this box set was only announced, I think it would have been 2 months ago. I can remember it was announced during when I was in a law lecture, and all of a sudden my phone started to ping with absolutely loads of messages of simply just the cover, because a lot of people thought he's either going to love this or hate this, and I can tell you, I listened to the whole box set today and I absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, by no means was I annoyed that I had a whole 4 to 5 hours worth of Big Finish to listen to. It was in fact a joy, and I'm happy to be sat here reviewing yet another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama release. The Lives of Captain Jack Volume 2 is currently available to order from the Big Finish website. Currently at the pre-order price of £24.99 for the physical box set and £19.99 for the download. The director is Scott Handcock, the producer James Goss, script editors James Goss and Guy Adams, along with music by Ben Foster, Richard Fox, Steve Foxon, and the executive producers are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery. The first volume of The Lives of Captain Jack was released in June 2017, and I can't exactly recall why I decided to review it, as even to this day on the Host Productions it is quite a rare occurrence for me to dip into the torture releases. Naturally, this box set was a completely different story due to the inclusion of Colin Baker as the 6th Doctor. The cover alone being simply stunning and nothing that I quite ever expected to see on an official Doctor Who product release. Lee Binding once again creating some absolutely great and stunning work. The previous volume did leave me a little bit confused. Some of the adventures were undeniably a little bit better than the others, therefore I was a little bit cautious upon listening to this volume. And I am happy to report that I actually enjoyed this release a little bit more. This box set felt like it had more structure, and I found the 3 stories to be a lot more interesting. Episode 1, Peace of Mind, written by James Goss, is the main selling point of this box set. Captain Jack Harkness meeting the one and only 6th Doctor. Jack's role stepping into the Doctor's shoes like he is the newest incarnation of the Doctor, fresh from regeneration. Before I go any further with this story, I do not think this episode will sit well with some fans. It's not as serious as some of the other Doctor Who releases out there from the classic series, such as the Doctor Who Big Finish main range, that tends to be a lot more serious and straight within its storytelling. This episode is theatrical, egotistical, and a tad over the top, which to me makes complete sense. Captain Jack absolutely loves himself, and old Sixie loves his outbursts, and this story is absolutely full of them. It tests the relationship between Jack and the Doctor that is so far from the incarnation that he knows, yet also by the end of the episode, somehow the same Doctor he wishes to find once again after the events of Parting of the Ways and Bad Wolf in Series 1. Jack is the centre of attention, having the limelight for the entire story, which being a 6th Doctor fan, naturally I did want to see more from Colin Baker, but the scenes Colin was present throughout delivered an impact that made his presence even more important, and brought a smile to my face every single damn time. Due to me listening to quite a lot of Big Finish here and there from many different ranges, I normally always get a odd buzzy feeling when I listen to a story, and you can just tell within the first few scenes that this is going to be a really fun episode, and something of which that will be one that I remember. And this episode does exactly that, because the opening scene for this box set, before the titles even run, features John Barrowman meeting the 6th Doctor in a moment that I couldn't necessarily predict. It was very dramatic, and Colin himself, although he doesn't really do too much within the actual scene, it was something of which that was really well acted. I was really impressed by Colin's performance, and it actually sounded like an era was coming to an end, and the way that it just started the actual series literally made my jaw drop. And I think that is the way that Big Finish can do stuff very well in both a cinematic way, because they start the stories in a way that you least expect, and then we cut into a version of the Captain Jack theme that can also be witnessed on the official Doctor Who Big Finish YouTube channel, do a rendition of the Captain Jack Lives of Captain Jack theme, and it is a little bit of a combination between that of the 80s Doctor Who theme, and it is absolutely brilliant and retro, really nicely sets off the style of the actual story. And yeah, I've had it on repeat whilst taking notes for this review. I really do like it. Once again, a nice way, and leaves a good impression when you actually start this story. As for the actual narrative itself, it is the big one of the box set, I think, which is why I half expected it to be the ending episode of the box set, bringing back the Doctor. It's quite a big deal, of course, meeting Captain Jack especially. However, they decided to start the box set off on a high. I'm not complaining, but it was a really nice way to actually start the series, and it is the big space adventure. It's one of which where you see Captain Jack stepping into the shoes of the Doctor, and he essentially needs to act like the Sixth Doctor for the story, being very eccentric. Of course, the Sixth Doctor's vocabulary is very vast and broad, and that is something that is really nicely reflected within John Barrowman's performance. And we see John Barrowman as Captain Jack go to this place called the Memoriad, essentially, and it's where dead people's souls are kind of uploaded when they die, and there is this other race or an interface that is kind of voiced by this character called Callistra. Basically wants to have more emotions. She wants to have a soul of her own, and she believes by using essentially this dead race and kind of harbouring their souls, that can be the way of them having more emotions and more understanding of other races. And the actual story itself, you do meet a few characters here and there, and I was very worried to start with that it was going to be an episode that kind of has a lot going on and very little time to actually develop the people that you meet. However, there is a character called Zor who sounds like a villain in the actual story, and he's the equivalent of a commander who was really nicely played. Then of course, with John Barrowman stepping into the role as the Doctor, it only makes sense for him to have an assistant for the story as well, and she is called Hayat. I was really impressed with the actress's performance. There is a moment that I'm not going to reveal what happens, but I thought that it was really touching and it was very intense what happened, and the way that it was directed as well was really professionally driven. I was actually getting quite a lot of harkbacks to the War Master series, and the way that that feels incredibly contemporary and modern in its design, like a movie or a Netflix series. And it is no surprise that this box set is in fact directed by Scott Handcock. Once again, a few of his traits coming in there to feel very modern. And yeah, the character was acted incredibly well, and I was very impressed. So I decided to look on the cast as to what character I was praising or what actress I was praising, and it turns out it is none other than Sophie Hopkins, who plays April in Class, which I was very, very shocked by. I could kind of tell after that it was obviously her voice, but I was impressed by her performance. So once again, of course, April was probably one of the better characters in Class, I would say, but I thought she did very well in this story. Of course, Colin, at the end of the story, I'm not going to mention what happens, but there is a moment when he actually has quite a lot of absence throughout the actual story, but when he bounds in at the very end, you can just kind of tell this was the moment for me to say, that's my Doctor, and that's why I love him, because there is something about him that even though he's doing something incredibly daft, it still works really well. It's kind of odd because the Sixth Doctor can be incredibly serious and deadly, and a character or a Doctor incarnation that you don't want to get on the wrong side of, but also at the same time can do these incredibly daft and childlike things as well, such as in this story doing an impression of Captain Jack with this really over-the-top American voice that I couldn't help but smile for, because it was just funny in the way that he did it, and it was a really good laugh, a really entertaining story. I think my only complaint is we see a monster in the story called the Genevar, which does take an embodiment in the actual episode as Callistra, the android kind of interface character, and I would love to see more of them as an actual pure monster as a species, because they were a very good threat, a very good opponent as well for the Doctor and Captain Jack, and there was a few close shaves as well, so they did feel like a very good force to deal with, and yeah, generally overall a nice space adventure. Following on from the loud space opera that is A Piece of Mind, we have Episode 2, What Have I Done, written by Guy Adams, which is pretty much the exact opposite of the adventure the box set starts with. This episode is a World War I two-hander that can be seen as a little bit cold and miserable. The funny, joking version of Jack has now been replaced by a much more historical and suffering version of Jack within the War of Gallipoli, surrounded by death and one other wounded soldier that he is trying to help, which is Eta, played by Attila Akinci. Eta is surrounded by mystery and presumably a dark past that Jack tries to learn more about throughout the episode's duration, whilst a mysterious beast lurks in the shadows of the battlefield. He is very well played. Attila and Barrowman have a form of rapport that keeps the story going, which is difficult for a 1-hour episode, but I think Guy Adams pulls this off rather well. This episode kind of has one of those very unusual scenarios in the similar manner as Midnight, the Series 4 story, where you don't quite know what the monster is. So what I could actually get from my listening experience of this episode was that it was a monster that kind of fed off nerves or grief. And of course, naturally, we are in a war zone, and nerves and emotions and threats are going to be running very, very high because you have these different sides against each other, and the monster comes out at night in a rather spooky way and kind of treads around the battlefield, and you never really, I was going to say you never really get to see them, but then again it's an audio drama so you don't get to see anything, but in a way they are not present for much of a scene. That was very odd. I thought that maybe, I couldn't quite understand if it was due to a lack in development on the monster's part, or if it was just a mysterious aspect of the actual plot itself that they wanted to keep the monster a little bit more unknown. Seeing as well, Gallipoli was a really nice touch. Having the Turkish and the many other sides of World War I within the actual story itself was a great touch. It wasn't just a stereotypical World War I episode where you have the trenches and the British and the Germans and that's pretty much it. Of course there was many other fronts of the World Wars, such as I think it was in A Finest Hour in Ravenous, the first episode. We had a story completely dedicated to a more minority fraction of pilots, so I really like the big delving into the World Wars. However, those smaller areas that people actually forget about. The characters as well, of course it is a two-hander, so you only have Captain Jack as well as this other character called Eta, and they do bounce off each other quite well. I think that Eta at points, especially within the early half, was quite mysterious. You didn't really know too much about him. He did seem a little bit of a cardboard cutout, simply because he was saying absolutely nothing other than "what have I done." It kind of gave me the impression of shell shock or something like that taking on the form within this character who has been injured. I do like the story, but at the same time I think that like is not a very good word, because it's not an entertaining one by any means. It's far from an entertaining story. You certainly wouldn't listen to this episode to up your morale or to make yourself feel happy, because this story is a miserable one. It's set in a miserable location. It is raining for pretty much 100% of its runtime. I also imagine if it was a visual episode it would be incredibly dimly lit. There is not much to actually like about it from the positivity side of things, but there is that depressing side of it, very truthfully spoken by Guy Adams, and I think that it is very powerful in the way that it has been written, as I say, but for me, it may have not been to my complete tastes. I think simply because the two episodes that surround this are kind of really light-hearted and fun, and this one seems to be a little bit of an outlier, which is nice as well at the same time, I suppose, for the sake of variety. Driving Miss Wells ends the lives of Captain Jack Volume 2 and sees the return of the one and only Trinity Wells, a staple of the Russell T Davies era of the show, and makes for the second character of this box set that I never quite expected to see alongside Captain Jack in an official piece of Doctor Who media. Lachelle Carl deserves a lot of credit for this episode, as well as James Goss. They have managed to present a character with previously no emotion or life story with exactly those two things, with Captain Jack as her driver while she travels to do book signings around the country. One of the biggest arguments that people will have about the return of Trinity Wells is why? Why bring back a character that was simply a creation of RTD to show human media reaction to alien incursion? My answer, why not? If this makes for a creative and entertaining adventure, then Big Finish should certainly go for it, as when they do, Episodes like this happen, a great tribute to Russell T Davies' era of the show, with references to the Autons, the Christmas Invasion, Torchwood, Atmos, the Rachnos, and even the Slovene, and many others. Another rather captivating, character-driven piece. I can remember a few months ago on social media, a few people were saying online about how Trinity Wells was almost this icon for the Russell T Davies era of the show, and that is really interesting considering that she appears throughout quite a lot of stories, as well as in Sarah Jane and Torchwood, and yet you can't really class her has a fully fledged character. We don't really know much about her. She doesn't really have much personality because she is a newsreader, and it is amazing to think that so many months down the line and we now have a whole 1 hour episode completely dedicated to her as a person. The actual alien of this story is entirely focused around Trinity and everything is happening around her. It is one thing bringing back a character for an actual episode, and it's another thing creating a story that is completely based around that character, and James Goss has somehow created this character essentially out of nothing. We now have a personal life, she now has emotions, and I think that is brilliantly presented in this episode. We have Judith Chander in this episode playing Trinity Wells' mum, who is in hospital in intensive care essentially, and throughout the duration of the episode you see her deteriorating because her health is decreasing, and that is a really personal aspect of the story because it shows a slightly weaker side to Trinity, and all the time after her coming back from her book signings she is there by her mother's bedside talking to her, and that really nicely actually brings out a side of her that you don't really see throughout the majority of the rest of the actual episode. And the main theme of this actual story is around her original career. Of course, she was originally an anchorwoman on TV, and now she has left that job behind. The story really nicely opens up with a little bit of a montage of her reading out the news for the many different stories that we have seen over the RTD era of the show. We have almost a flash forward to a few years later, and we have her doing a book signing and releasing a book all around the news and how it is wrong, and how the government and other people are trying to cover up these things that haven't actually happened, and aliens are fake, they aren't real, all these things that she has reported on are not real, and it's this whole idea around fake news, something of which that is very much in the public spotlight today. Of course, within the 21st century, technology is something of which that has developed drastically over the past 10 or so years, and in the span of my lifetime, technology has developed in such a rapid manner that is really nicely reflected throughout this story, and of course especially with the sheer popularity of social media, we now have that concept always in the news of fake news and fake things that are going on and cover-ups, and we of course have many different news outlets out there, and we also have people generally posting news to social media with very little authority that can also be very untruthful, and the whole idea of Trinity's book is all around that as well, the truth of the news, and interestingly the entirety of the story from the listener's perspective is also about that. Have almost a dilemma as you are experiencing this episode about, is Trinity telling the truth? Is she just losing it a little bit? Has the pressure of the work that she has had over the many years finally got to her and she's almost having a nervous breakdown? Is Jack knowing what's going on? Does he believe the truth? Is it false? Is there a cover-up? And it does mean there is an element of mystery throughout this episode. There is a lot of things going on, lots of different jumps from many different scenes within this urban city environment. We have her in the hospital for one scene, then of course in the car with Jack because he is now her driver. Also have her essentially snatching somebody from their workplace, and we have this whole idea of an alien that she believes that she can see, however nobody else can see it. That is what I meant earlier about the alien being very personal to her as a person, and I think that it is a clever way to write a story, and once again this episode has a few similar themes to that of the first episode. It can be very light-hearted, but also at the same time it has some very darker, intense moments in there as well. And I think the best way to wrap up this story was that near the very end we had this lovely moment where Trinity actually says, "I knew you were working for Torchwood all along," and she says something about Unit and Torchwood, and when they are eventually gone, she will be there to pick up the pieces. And I don't know if that's Big Finish having a few hints or just putting a remark out there, but who knows? Maybe this isn't the end of Trinity. Maybe we'll see a little bit more of her in the future, because I think if Big Finish have proved anything in this story, or I think if James Goss has proved anything for that matter, is that they've essentially created a whole story and a character with actual emotions and feelings and stresses and pressures and a career out of nothing. And that is what's brilliant about this story. It's one thing creating an episode, and it's another one creating something out of nothing, and for that nothing to be actually turning out to be a very entertaining piece of 1 hour drama. So thank you very much for watching this review of The Lives of Captain Jack Volume 2. I hope you have enjoyed it. Of course, as you would have seen throughout this review, much like in my other recent Big Finish reviews, a few things have changed up within the format. This review has been a combination between a narration style and of course in front of the camera, much like my natural Big Finish reviews that I've been doing over the many years on this channel. I would much appreciate feedback. If you like this format, let me know. Of course, some of the previous reviews that I've done over the past week or so have been solely narration. This one's a combination of the two, and the Paternoster Gang one is also following a rather similar theme. So feedback and comments will be much appreciated. I'll hopefully be adapting that in the future reviews, generally just to make it better for the audience reception and to make these reviews easier and nicer to watch, essentially, at the end of the day, because I care how I present these reviews overall. I think it's about time for a little bit of a change. So yeah, as I say, feedback and anything else is much appreciated in the comments section below. So overall, a very fun box set, something of which I certainly wasn't expecting, and I do recommend this if you are a fan of John Barrowman and Captain Jack as an actual character, because these stories and this box set as a whole did in fact make me respect him as a character. I do think a little bit more, and occasionally it does make me think maybe a delve into the Torchwood range is something of which I should do at some point when I have a little bit more time on my hands, and this box set is certainly a step up from the previous box set, being The Lives of Captain Jack Volume 1, that seemed to me to lack in a bit of direction. So thank you very much for watching this review, and as per usual, stay tuned for more Big Finish reviews absolutely every single month on the Host Productions, and of course brand new Doctor Who content absolutely every single week. So thanks for watching, and I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.